Imagine being told your home doesn't belong to you anymore, that everything you've built, everyone you love, is just an obstacle in someone else's path to getting richer. That's exactly what was happening to the small human colony on a moon called Vesper 7, and they had no idea. In a courtroom older than most stars, their fate was being decided by creatures of crystal and light. If you think it's unfair when the powerful crush the weak, then you're going to want to see how this story ends. The young ambassador, Kithari, stood before the Galactic Council, his bright blue scales shimmering with ambition. He was only 200 years old, a teenager by his people's standards, and he saw the Council's ancient traditions as a roadblock to progress. He looked at the Council elder, a 10,000-year-old crystalline being called a Lithori, and saw not wisdom, but a fossil, a relic that needed to be pushed aside. Kithari's people, the Dominion, were a powerhouse, and he was their rising star. He had climbed the political ladder faster than anyone in generations by being aggressive when others were timid. He believed his people, who controlled 40 star systems and the third largest military in the galaxy, should be taking what they deserved, not asking for permission. Today, he was here for a small, unclaimed moon named Vesper 7. Its rocks were packed with minerals that would make the Dominion wealthier than ever. But there was one tiny problem. A human colony had been living there for 60 years. They have no legal claim, Kithari argued, his voice sharp. They are squatters. We have asked them to leave 3 times and they have ignored us. I am asking for your permission to remove them. A few of the council members shifted uncomfortably. That's when the ancient Lithori spoke, its voice sounding like mountains grinding together. You wish to move against the humans. I wish to move against illegal settlers, Kithari snapped back. Their species doesn't matter. Oh, the Lithori rumbled slowly. Their species is the only thing that matters. The ancient being lifted a crystal arm, and a shimmering holographic book appeared in the air. It looked ancient, its cover frayed and its pages yellowed. The Book of Cautions, the Lithori explained, a collection of warnings from the founders of this concord, warnings about species too dangerous to provoke. Read entry 7412. With a sneer, Kithari read it out loud. Humans, observe only, never provoke, never threaten what they protect. They are patient until they are not. He waved his hand, dismissing the book. With all due respect, Elder, this was written thousands of years ago. The humans back then were primitives, barely able to leave their own planet, he argued. Today they're a minor species, no special powers, no natural weapons. They live short lives and breed slowly. They are not a threat. They are not a threat, the Lithori repeated, its voice low and heavy, because no one has made them a threat in a very, very long time. That is not an accident. Another council member, an insect-like being, chimed in. The humans are peaceful traders. They cause no problems. Why risk galactic stability for one moon? Because stability is just another word for stagnation, Kithari shot back. If we let the humans get away with this, it shows weakness. The Concord's authority will be a joke. The debate raged for 3 hours, and they finally settled on a compromise. Kithari could send a diplomatic mission to offer the humans a fair price to leave. If they said no, he had to come back to the council. Kithari smiled and agreed. He had absolutely no intention of keeping his promise. 2 weeks later, a ship arrived at Vesper 7. It didn't carry diplomats. It carried soldiers with a simple, brutal message. You have 30 days to leave, or you will be removed by force. The people of Vesper 7 sent back their own message. They had been on this moon for 60 years. They had built their homes here, raised their children here, and buried their parents here. This was their home. They were not leaving. When Kithari read their reply, a wide grin spread across his face. This was exactly what he wanted. He called his military advisors. "The illegal settlers have refused a lawful order," he declared. "They've left us no choice. Prepare a strike force. It's time to give them a demonstration of Dominion resolve." An older officer, Verthon, spoke up nervously. "Sir, the Council only authorized diplomacy. An attack is a direct violation." "The Council authorized me to solve this," Kithari interrupted. "The elders are cowards, afraid of shadows from the past. The humans are nothing. A show of force now will prevent decades of headaches later." "And what if they fight back?" Verthon asked. Kithari laughed out loud. "With what? Their cargo ships and mining drills. They have no military, no powerful allies. They are alone and weak. By the time the galaxy finds out what happened, it will already be over." The strike force arrived on a quiet morning. Down on the colony, kids were getting ready for school. Farmers were heading out to the massive biodomes that grew the settlement's food. It was just another peaceful, ordinary day. And then the sky caught fire. The Dominion ships didn't target homes or people, not at first. They targeted the biodomes, the colony's source of life. Without them, the humans would either starve or be forced to flee. It was a cold, cruel strategy. But Kithari had ordered a demonstration, and his commanders knew that meant the message had to be loud and terrifying. The first dome shattered in a silent, blinding flash. Then the second, the third, and the fourth. On the ground, people ran in terror, searching for shelter that was never meant to stop an orbital bombardment. One of the schools had been built right next to a biodome. It was caught in the blast of a stray shot. 47 children were gone in the blink of an eye. The attack lasted for 1 hour. When the smoke cleared, 60% of the colony was rubble. The final death toll was 3,247. Among them were 847 children. Kithari reviewed the report with immense satisfaction. The message had been sent. He fired off a quick note to the Council, simply stating that the situation on Vesper 7 has been resolved. But he made a mistake. During the attack, the humans sent out a desperate distress call. It was picked up by a passing trade ship, which immediately shared it with the entire galactic network. Within hours, everyone knew what the Dominion had done. Kithari was summoned before an emergency session of the Council. He stood there without a hint of shame. "The humans were given a chance to leave peacefully," he said coldly. "They chose defiance." "You killed children!" the insect ambassador cried out. "You bombed a school!" "A regrettable but necessary part of the demonstration," Kithari replied smoothly. "They understand our seriousness now." The room fell into a dead, horrified silence. Then, the ancient Lithori slowly rose from its seat. As its crystal body creaked toward the exit, Kithari demanded, "Where are you going? This session isn't over." The Lithori paused and turned its head, its ancient eyes fixing on the arrogant young ambassador. "The session is over," it rumbled. "And now the consequences begin. The warning was never about what the humans would do to you. It was about what is done to those who harm them." And as Kithari watched, baffled, the Lithori simply said, "They are coming." In the silent void above the ruined moon, space itself began to tear open. Its voice, when it finally spoke, was thick with what sounded like a mix of sorrow and pity. "This session is over," the ancient creature declared. "You asked me why we are afraid of the humans. You're about to find out for yourself, and I have no desire to be here when you do." It turned and moved toward the exit, pausing one last time at the doorway. "Enter 7412 wasn't written by the first Concord," the Lithori said. "It was written by the survivors of the second, the one that came before us, the one that made the exact same mistake you just did." "What happened to them?" Kithari demanded. But the Lithori didn't answer. It just walked out, leaving a heavy silence in its wake as the other elders followed, one by one. Not a single one of them would speak to Kethvari. They wouldn't even look at him. They just left, as if the debate was finished and the verdict was already in. Kethvari stood all alone in the vast hall of the Galactic Concord, telling himself they were all just fools, cowards, chained to old superstitions with no basis in the real world. The humans were a minor species, after all. They didn't have an army or a fleet or any weapons that could possibly threaten the Dominion. They would mourn their dead, file a few useless protests, and in the end, they'd accept that they couldn't stand up to a superior power. That's just how the galaxy worked. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak learned to live with it. Kethvari went back to his homeworld a celebrated hero. The news channels sang his praises for taking decisive action. The youth of the Velixi species looked up to him as a strong leader, someone who wasn't afraid to do what had to be done. His political enemies went quiet, knowing they couldn't challenge a man so popular. He was absolutely sure he'd made the right call. The humans would just become another footnote in history, a bedtime story about what happens when you defy the Velixi Dominion. He couldn't have been more wrong. Millions of light years away, in human-controlled space, the news of Vesper 7 was spreading like a shockwave. Every last human in the galaxy heard what happened. They saw the footage of the burning colony domes. They heard the list of the dead being read aloud. They watched heartbreaking clips of children's toys scattered among the ruins. And in that moment, something inside them shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no furious speeches or calls for an immediate war, no riots in the streets. Humans just didn't react the way every other species thought they would. They just got quiet. Factories that used to make hover cars and luxury goods started making something else entirely. Scientists who had been researching cures for diseases suddenly changed their entire focus. Engineers who were designing faster, more efficient starship engines began drafting plans for something very, very different. And across all of human space, people who had never even met, with no leader giving them orders, all arrived at the same cold, hard conclusion. The Velini had murdered their children, and that was something that would not be allowed to stand. A response was coming. It wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be driven by emotion. It was going to be patient, meticulous, and absolute. The humans had an old saying, one that went all the way back to their planet of origin: revenge is a dish best served cold. The Velini were about to find out just how cold it could get. 3 weeks crawled by after the massacre on Vespera 7. Ambassador Kethvari kept waiting for the human reaction. Every single morning he'd check the intelligence briefings. Every single evening he'd ask his advisors the same question: what are the humans doing? And the answer was always the same: nothing. No diplomatic complaints had been lodged with the Galactic Concord. No warships had been spotted moving toward Velini territory. No angry threats were being broadcast over the comms channels. The humans had simply gone dark. At first, Kethvari was just confused. He was expecting, well, something. A few angry words at the very least, maybe some trade sanctions, or even a token attack on a tiny, worthless Velini outpost. Those were the normal, predictable moves for a species that had been wronged. Those were the moves he was prepared for. But silence? It didn't make any sense. After a month, his confusion slowly turned into smug satisfaction. The humans, he figured, were simply too weak and pathetic to do anything. They must have taken a good, hard look at the might of the Volanaxi Dominion and realized they didn't stand a chance. They were just accepting their fate with a quiet, sad dignity. Kethvari actually called a press conference. He stood in front of the cameras, a proud, arrogant smile plastered on his face. "The situation with the human colony has been fully resolved," he announced. "The illegal squatters have been removed from Vespera 7. More importantly, we have sent a clear message to the rest of the galaxy. The Valini dominion will not be ignored. We will not be disrespected. We will take what is ours by right, and anyone who dares stand in our way will suffer the consequences." He paused for dramatic effect, soaking in the attention. Some of you have asked about the human response. Well, I'll tell you what the human response has been. Nothing. Silence. Acceptance. The humans have finally learned their place in this galaxy. They understand now that they are not, and never were, our equals. That broadcast was seen all across the galaxy. Many species were horrified by Kethvari's sheer arrogance. A few were actually impressed by his boldness. But in human territories, millions and millions of people watched him speak with faces that showed no emotion at all. The old general, Verthan, watched the broadcast from his office at military headquarters. Unlike his ambassador, he wasn't relieved by the human silence. He was terrified by it. Verthan had actually studied human history. He'd read their ancient texts about their endless wars, their brutal conflicts, and their long, bloody climb from a primitive world to the star. He knew things about humanity that a fool like Kethvari had never bothered to look up. Humans weren't a passive race. They didn't just roll over and accept defeat. Time and time again throughout their history, they had fought against impossible odds. They had stared down enemies far stronger than themselves and had always found a way to win. They were clever, they were stubborn, and they were patient. But most of all, they were incredibly, terrifyingly good at holding a grudge. This silence didn't mean the humans were giving up. It meant they were planning. Verthan tried to explain this to Kethvari, but the ambassador just laughed in his face. "You've been reading too many dusty old history books," Kethvari scoffed. "The humans from your books were different. They were warriors fighting to survive. Today's humans are soft. They've had peace for far too long. They've forgotten how to fight." Or maybe, Verthan suggested quietly, they've learned something more effective than fighting. Maybe they've learned how to wait. Kethvari just waved his hand, dismissing him completely. Wait for what? They have nothing. No weapons that can touch ours. No fleet that can challenge ours. Time is on our side. Every day that goes by, we get stronger and they get weaker. The longer they wait, the worse it gets for them. Verthan didn't say another word. He knew it was useless to argue. All he could do now was watch and wait and pray that he was wrong. 2 months after the attack, something odd started to happen. Human cargo ships began leaving ports all over the galaxy, not in a big rush, not like they were fleeing, just quietly, steadily, one after another. A human freighter captain told his trading partners he was taking a long vacation and would be back in a few months. A human engineer on a deep space station put in for leave to visit family, saying she wasn't sure when she'd be back. A human scientist on a joint research team suddenly announced that personal matters needed his immediate attention elsewhere. On their own, none of these departures seemed like a big deal. They all had perfectly normal explanations. But when you started adding them all up, a chilling pattern began to take shape. Within 60 days, there wasn't a single human being left outside of their own territory. Very few species even noticed this. Humans had always been a tiny minority in the larger galaxy, just a handful of traders, scientists, and engineers whose skills were useful. Their absence was like a whisper in the wind for most. But the elders noticed. The Lither representative, who was still shaken by Kethvari's actions, called a secret meeting of the senior council. They met in a small, hidden chamber far from the public halls. No official records were taken. "The humans are pulling back," the Lithori stated. "All of them. From everywhere." "Maybe they're scared," suggested the Moric ambassador, a being made of living fire. "Maybe they're going into hiding." "Humans don't hide," the Kritak representative countered. "Our traders have worked alongside them for centuries. When a human is scared, they get loud and aggressive. When they're angry, they get quiet. And right now, they are very, very quiet. What does that mean? The Morag ambassador asked. The Lithori answered, its voice grim. It means they aren't retreating. They're clearing the board. The other elders exchanged looks of dawning horror. Clearing the board for what? The Morag demanded. For whatever is coming next, the Lithori replied, projecting a data screen into the middle of the room. It was displaying information they had gathered from spies and sensors all across the galaxy. Human industrial output was up by 4,000%. Human shipyards, which had been practically dormant for generations, were now working around the clock. Their mining operations had expanded to every last rock and asteroid in their territory. But there was one last piece of data that the Lithri highlighted, the one that made everyone's blood run cold. Human birth rates, the ancient being said. For 300 years they have been perfectly stable, 2 children per family on average, just enough to maintain their population but not grow it. The display flashed, showing the latest numbers. In the 2 months since Vespera 7, the average has jumped to 4 children per family. In some areas, it's even higher. Human women who had decided they never wanted children were suddenly changing their minds. Men who had planned on waiting for years were starting families right now. And why? The Maracast observers were stumped. What in the world did making babies have to do with preparing for war? The Kretak, however, understood completely. As an insectoid species, they lived in hives where reproduction was a core part of survival strategy. They're getting ready for a long, brutal campaign, the Kretak reported. They're making sure that even if a whole lot of them die, their species will survive. They're anticipating losses, heavy losses. Their own, you mean? The Moragic asked. Or someone else's, the Lithori shot back. We can't know for sure, but we know this. Whatever the humans are planning, they believe the price will be staggering. And they are getting ready to pay it. The elders forwarded this intel to Kethvari, urging him to find a diplomatic solution before it was too late. They even offered to help broker a peace treaty, warning him that the situation was far more dangerous than he grasped. Kethvari shrugged off their concerns as simple cowardice. The baby boom? An emotional overreaction to the tragedy, obviously. The industrial expansion was just a standard economic reshuffling. And the humans pulling back from galactic space? Pure fear. Everything had a perfectly logical explanation. He sent a reply to the council that was polite on the surface but dripping with sarcasm. He thanked them for their concern and assured them the Valinexi Dominion had everything under control. He even suggested the elders might want to stick to topics within their actual area of expertise. The Lithe read his message and felt something it hadn't felt in 3,000 years. Pure terror. Meanwhile, back in human space, something incredible was happening. Humans weren't like other species. They didn't have a central government dictating everyone's actions. They didn't have a hive mind coordinating their every move. They were all individuals, every single one with their own thoughts, dreams, and plans. And yet, without a single order being given, without any grand strategy being announced, they were all marching in the exact same direction. Factories that used to make toys started churning out precision components. Farms that once grew food for the table began cultivating the raw materials for combat medics and performance enhancers. Universities that taught poetry and history started focusing on engineering and physics. Entertainment studios began creating hyper-realistic training simulations. Nobody told them to do it. No law was passed. No leader gave a speech. They just did it because they all knew it had to be done. A human philosopher once wrote that humanity's greatest superpower was its ability to cooperate without being coordinated. Other species needed leaders, orders, and rigid chains of command. Humans could just look at a problem, see what needed to happen, and work together instinctively to solve it. This was now happening on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed before. In shipyards all across human territory, engineers were working around the clock. They weren't just building regular ships. They were building something totally new, something that had never existed. The designs were a fusion of 1,000 different brilliant minds. An engineer in one system came up with a better engine. Another, halfway across the quadrant, designed a superior hull. A third dreamed up a new weapon system, while a fourth perfected a new stealth technology. These ideas merged and flowed together like streams becoming a mighty river. Within weeks, the humans had designed ships that were unlike anything the galaxy had ever laid eyes on. They were small, way smaller than the colossal warships other species favored. They were fast, faster than anything else in the vacuum of space. And they were quiet. So quiet, most sensors could barely pick them up. And they were being built not by the dozen, but by the thousands. The few Valinexi intelligence agents who still had contacts in human space sent back reports that were dismissed as fantasy. The numbers couldn't possibly be right. No species could build that many ships that fast. The sensors had to be broken. The data had to be corrupt. Verthan read these reports, and a cold dread settled deep in his heart. He demanded a meeting with Kethvari. The ambassador agreed, but his tone made it clear he thought it was a complete waste of his time. "The humans are building a fleet," Verthan said flatly. "A massive fleet, bigger than anything they've ever had before." "So," Kethvari replied with a smirk, "let them build. What are they going to do with it? Attack us? Our defense systems are the best in the galaxy. Our ships are bigger, more powerful, and there are more of them. Even if the humans throw every last ship they have at us, they'll just shatter against our walls like waves on a cliff." "But what if they don't attack our walls?" Verthan asked. "What if they do something we're not expecting?" Kethvari actually laughed. "Like what?" "Humans are predictable. They're creatures of emotion. They'll come at us in a blaze of anger and fury, and we will crush them. That's how this always plays out. These humans have been silent for 3 months, Verthan pointed out. There hasn't been any anger, no fury, just quiet, methodical preparation. That isn't emotional, that's calculated. Then they'll come at us with their calculations, and we will still crush them, Kethvari insisted. The math is simple. We have more ships, we have bigger ships, we have better weapons. Nothing the humans can build is going to change that simple fact. Verthan had one last card to play. He'd saved it for the end because he knew it was the craziest, most unbelievable piece of intel he had. "There's something else," he said. "Something that worries me more than all the ships combined." "What?" "The humans are smiling." Kethvari just blinked. "Smiling?" "Our agents on the ground report that humans are going about their work with happy looks on their faces. They're not angry. They're not grieving. They're smiling. They look at each other with this shared understanding. They're telling little jokes. They almost seem excited. Perhaps they're just a naturally cheerful species," Kethvari offered. "They're not. Humans wear their negative emotions on their sleeves. When they're hurt, they show it. When they're mourning, everyone knows it. But when they are at their most dangerous, they smile. It's how they steel themselves for violence. They tell jokes to calm their nerves. They smile to hide their fear. They laugh to convince themselves that it's all going to be okay." Verthan leaned forward, his voice low. "Our agents say they've never seen so many humans smiling at once. Everywhere they go, every single human they see is smiling, laughing, joking. It's like they're all in on the same private joke, as if they all know something that we don't." For just a split second, Kethvari felt a tiny flicker of doubt, but he snuffed it out. "You're seeing ghosts," he said. "The humans are weak. They've always been weak. Nothing has changed." Verthan left the meeting knowing that nothing he could say would ever change the ambassador's mind. He would believe in human weakness right up until the moment that belief got him killed. And that moment, Verthan suspected, was coming very, very soon. In human space, the work continued. Ships were finished, weapons were tested, plans were finalized, and everywhere, humans went about their tasks with a quiet resolve and small, secret smiles. 6 months to the day after the attack on Vesper 7, everything was ready. The humans hadn't forgotten, and they certainly hadn't forgiven. They had simply been patient, and now their patience had run out. The morning started just like any other on the Valinexi homeworld. The twin suns rose over the capital city. Government drones made their way to their offices. Military officers checked in at their command posts. Ambassador Kethvari was eating breakfast in his private villa, scrolling through his daily schedule on a datapad. Then, everything just stopped working. It happened everywhere, all at once. Every light went out, every screen went blank, every ship in orbit fell silent. Every weapon at every military base across 40 star systems powered down at the exact same instant. Kethvari sat in the sudden, shocking darkness, his breakfast growing cold on the table. For a long moment, he couldn't process what was happening. A power failure? Impossible. The backup generators should have kicked in instantly. An attack? But there was no warning, no alert, no enemy ships on any sensors. He fumbled for his emergency communicator. It was completely dead. All across the Valinexi Dominion, billions of citizens were experiencing the same jarring shock. Military commanders found themselves standing on the bridges of dead ships that wouldn't respond to a single command. Pilots were stuck in fighters that wouldn't fly. Gunners stared at weapon consoles that wouldn't fire. Communications officers spoke into headsets that transmitted nothing but static. The entire military infrastructure of one of the galaxy's greatest powers had been switched off like a lamp, and nobody had seen a thing. For 3 hours, the Valinexi were plunged into darkness and silence. There was no way to talk to each other, no way to figure out what was happening. People nervously gathered in the streets, looking up at the sky, just waiting for something to happen. Then, just as suddenly, the power came back on. Lights flickered to life, screens lit up, comms crackled back online. Ships began to hum with restored energy. For a brief moment, there was a wave of collective relief. The crisis was over. Whatever that was, it was done. Then the military started running system checks. A gunner on a capital ship tried to fire a test shot from a plasma cannon. But instead of a roaring blast of superheated energy, a beam of harmless colored light shot out. It was pretty, almost decorative, but utterly useless. A pilot tried to push his fighter to combat speed. The engines whirred, but the ship crawled forward, barely moving faster than a cargo hauler. He slammed the throttle to maximum. The ship didn't respond at all. An engineer on a defense station ran a full diagnostic on their systems. Everything looked normal. Every system registered as 100% operational. But when he tried to run a live fire test, nothing worked the way it was supposed to. Weapons fired dazzling light shows. Shields were operating at a tiny fraction of their normal strength. Engines were putting out maybe a tenth of their usual power. Imagine being the most feared bully on the galactic playground, a military powerhouse known as the Dominion. Now, imagine waking up one morning to find all your toys are broken. That's exactly what happened when reports started pouring into their headquarters. Every single ship, station, and weapon platform hadn't been destroyed, but neutered, made completely harmless. For an old soldier named Than Reed, the news brought a grim sort of satisfaction. He'd tried to warn them. He told them humans were not to be trifled with, but nobody listened. Now, If you want to hear how this bully got their ultimate comeuppance, you're in the right place. How is this possible? Ambassador Kavari shrieked when he finally burst into the command center. How could they hit every single system at once? They'd need access to everything we have. Van Reed just looked at him calmly and said, "They had it." "Impossible. Our security is the best in the galaxy." "Apparently not," Than replied. Kavari, his scales turning pale with a mix of fury and terror, grabbed the old soldier by his uniform. "You knew this was coming. You warned me. How did you know?" Than gently but firmly pushed the ambassador's hands away. "I didn't know what they would do, only that they would do something. For the last 6 months, the humans have been preparing. They pulled all their people back from across the galaxy. They started building ships at a rate we couldn't comprehend, and the whole time they were smiling, sharing these secret little jokes." He waved a hand at the chaos of reports still flooding the screens. "Now we know what the joke was. They were already here. They were already inside every single one of our systems. They'd been there for months, maybe even years, just waiting, watching, and learning all our weak spots. And when they were ready," Thon finished, "they just reached out and switched us off." But Kavari was still protesting. "Nobody detected them. Our sensors never picked up a single intrusion." Than just shook his head. "Our sensors never detected them leaving either. Think about that for a second. Thousands of human ships flew into our space, went right up to our most secure facilities, did their work, and then left. And we saw nothing. We knew nothing. The only reason we even know they were here is because they wanted us to know." Before Kavari could argue, a new alert flashed across every screen in the room. A broadcast was coming through on all frequencies, being sent to every single communication device in the entire Dominion. A lone human ship had just appeared at the edge of their space. It was small and looked totally ordinary, like a simple cargo hauler. But this little ship was carrying a message that would shake their empire to its core. The broadcast started with just one image, a small, worn child's shoe, covered in dust and ash. It was found in the wreckage of a place called Esper 7. It belonged to a little girl named Emma. She was 7 years old when she died. Then, a calm human voice, completely devoid of emotion, began to speak. "The Valinexi Dominion killed 3,247 of our people on the moon called Vesper 7. Among the dead were 847 children. The youngest was 3 months old. The oldest was 17 years, the voice continued. They were students, farmers, engineers, and artists. They were mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. They had done nothing to you. They were killed because one of your politicians wanted to prove that human lives were worthless." The voice paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "We are here to prove otherwise." The image of the little shoe faded, replaced by a list of names. All 3,247 of them began to scroll slowly across the screen. "For each life you took, we will take 1 year of penance from the Valinexi Dominion. That comes to 3,247 years. Your grandchildren's grandchildren will still be paying for what you did," the voice stated flatly as the names kept scrolling. "You've already experienced the first part of this. Your military is useless. Your weapons are toys. Your ships are junk. Your defenses are gone. You are completely helpless." Another pause. "Don't mistake this for vengeance. Vengeance would have been faster. We would have brought our fleets and burned your worlds just like you burned ours. We could have done that. We chose not to." The names continued their somber march across the screen. Emma, age 7, Marcus, age 12, Sarah, age 5, David, age 16. Instead, you will live. You will live with the knowledge that you are only alive because we allow it. You will live, knowing that at any moment for the next 3,000 years, we could return and finish the job. But we won't, because killing you would end your punishment, and you deserve to be punished for a very, very long time. The broadcast ended. The screens went black. The lone human ship turned, jumped to faster-than-light speed, and vanished as quietly as it had appeared. For a long moment, nobody in the military headquarters said a word. They just stared at the blank screens, their minds reeling. Kavari was the first to snap out of it. He grabbed a comms device and started barking orders. "Find that ship. Track its FTL signature. I want our best engineers working on how to reverse whatever they did to our systems." Officers scrambled to follow his orders, just glad to have something to do. But Than Reed stood perfectly still, watching the pointless frenzy with tired eyes. "It won't help," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Kavari spun around to face him. "What?" "Finding that ship is pointless. It's just one of thousands. Fixing our systems won't work. The humans can just do it again. And we can't fight back because we have nothing left to fight with." "Then what do you suggest we do?" Kavari demanded. "Just accept this? Bow down to them?" "I suggest," Than replied, "that we finally accept reality. We attacked a peaceful human colony. We killed their children. We bragged about it. And now we are facing the consequences." He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. Billions of his people were out there, all learning the same terrifying lesson at the same time. The humans could have wiped them out. They had the power and the perfect opportunity. But they didn't. "Maybe that means something," Than said softly. "Maybe there's still a chance to limit the damage if we handle this the right way." "Handle it wisely?" Kavari's voice cracked into a shout. "They've crippled us. They've humiliated us in front of the whole galaxy. They're demanding over 3,000 years of penance. How do you handle that wisely?" Than's reply was simple: by not making it any worse. Across the galaxy, the news spread like a shockwave. Everyone heard how human ships had slipped in and out of Dominion space completely undetected. Every species learned that the most powerful military in the known universe had been rendered helpless in a single, silent moment. The realization was terrifying. If the humans could do this to the Valinexi, they could do it to anyone. Suddenly, no one felt safe. No defense system seemed good enough. The humans had been their quiet neighbors for centuries. And in all that time, it turned out they had been studying everyone, learning every weakness, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. But that day had come. The Galactic Concord called an emergency meeting. The Great Hall was packed with representatives from every species, and you could practically taste the fear in the air. The Lithori, an ancient crystalline being, presided over the meeting, looking even older and more weary than usual. "We have received a communication from the humans," it announced in a grave tone. "They wish to address this council. I have granted their request." The massive screens in the hall lit up, showing a human woman. She looked middle-aged with a bit of gray in her hair and friendly lines on her face. She wore simple clothes, nothing that suggested any kind of rank. She looked like she could be anybody's mother or neighbor. "My name is Sarah Chun," she said calmly. "I've been asked to speak for humanity today." The entire hall held its breath. "We have taken action against the Valinexi Dominion. You have all seen the results," she began. "Some of you are now afraid that you might be next. I'm here to tell you that your fear is understandable, but it is also manageable." She folded her hands in front of her. "We are not conquerors. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want your planets, your resources, or your obedience. All we have ever wanted is to be left in peace. For centuries we lived quietly with all of you. We traded fairly. We shared our knowledge. We asked for nothing in return but the right to exist. Her eyes seemed to sweep across the hall, making contact with every single representative. Vesper 7 was a test, but it wasn't our test, it was yours. You watched as one of your own attacked a civilian colony. You watched as children were murdered. Some of you sent polite notes of protest. Some of you expressed concern. But none of you did a single thing to stop it or to punish the ones responsible. A nervous murmur spread through the hall. We get it, she continued. The Valinexi are powerful. You were afraid of them. But now you've learned something very important. You should have been afraid of us. Sarah Chun leaned forward just a little. So here's what happens now. The Valinexi Dominion will live with what it has done. We will maintain a presence in their space to make sure they can never rebuild their military. This will last for 3,247 years, 1 year for every life they stole from us. She paused, letting that sink in. Any species that tries to help the Valinexi get around this punishment will be considered an accomplice. Any species that attacks human territory or citizens will get the exact same treatment. We don't want conflict, but we are done avoiding it. The murmuring in the hall grew louder. Oh, and one last thing, she added, her voice still calm, but her eyes turning hard as steel. For those of you who helped the Valinexi, who gave them intelligence or funding or political cover for their attack on Vesper 7, we have a separate message. She looked right into the camera. We know who you are. We have the records. We have the proof. Our representatives will be in touch soon to discuss how you plan to make amends for your part in the murder of our people. My advice to you is simple. When our people get there, be honest and cooperative. That was the end of the broadcast, and in the grand hall of the Galactic Concord, you could hear a pin drop. The representatives from a dozen different species just sat there, completely floored. A few of them had secretly cheered on Kithvari's attack. Others figured that putting the humans in their place was for the best. And some just looked the other way, thinking a little human colony's problems weren't their business. Now they knew just how wrong they were. The Lithori delegate stood up, his voice thick with what could have been satisfaction or maybe regret. The humans have made their position clear, he rumbled, and I have a feeling they mean every single word. For those of you who had a hand in the Vespera 7 massacre, the ancient being continued, turning to go, I suggest you think long and hard about your next move. This council is over. I have a hunch we'll all have plenty to talk about in the coming days. As the representatives slowly shuffled out, each trapped in their own worried thoughts, one thing was crystal clear. The galaxy had just changed forever. The humans had just reminded everyone of a truth the oldest races knew by heart, but the younger ones had forgotten. There are some species you just don't poke, not because they're looking for a fight or because they're naturally violent, but because when they finally decide to move, there's nothing in the universe that can get in their way. The Valinexi had just learned that lesson the hard way. And now, the rest of the galaxy was getting the memo. Somewhere deep in human space, the families of 3,247 victims watched the same broadcast and gave a slow, quiet nod. It wasn't enough to bring them back. Nothing ever would be. But it was a start. Justice was coming. It would be slow. It would be patient. And it would be thorough. The humans had taken 6 months to answer the attack on Vesper 7. They were prepared to take 3,000 years to finish that answer. They had all the time in the world. They had endless patience. And they had memories that would never, ever fade. All the galaxy could do was watch. Tiny human ships materialized around every single Valinaji planet within a week of Sarah Chun's broadcast. But they weren't warships. At least, They didn't look like warships. They were small craft with just a few humans on each. They simply slid into orbit and hovered there. They didn't fire a shot. They didn't make any threats. They didn't ask for a thing. They just watched. Every day, Valeni citizens would look up and see those silent, patient ships hanging in their sky, just waiting. Some tried to pretend they weren't there, going about their lives like it was business as usual. They told themselves it was just a scare tactic, that sooner or later the humans would get tired and go home, and everything would go back to the way it was. Those people were dead wrong. About a month after the ships showed up, a Valency military governor named Thrakener decided to push his luck. He was in charge of an outer colony, a planet far from the seat of power. He'd been secretly stockpiling resources and putting together a small fleet of warships, hoping he could restore a little of the Valency's military pride. He did it all on the down low, using hidden shipyards and avoiding any standard communication networks. He was absolutely certain the humans had no idea what he was up to. He was wrong about that, too. One morning, Thrakener woke up to discover his secret fleet was gone. Well, the ships were still there, physically sitting in their secret docks, but every single system on them was fried. Engines, weapons, life support, all of it. They were just dead hunks of metal, good for nothing but scrap. There was no message, no warning, not even a note to explain. The humans didn't even take credit for what they'd done. They just did it and then went right back to watching. Thrakener tried again a year later. He used totally different methods, different locations, and new security measures. The result was exactly the same. His brand new fleet was bricked before it ever had a chance to launch. He tried a third time, then a fourth, and a fifth. Every single time, no matter how sneaky he thought he was, the humans knew. And every single time, his hard work was erased with silent, perfect efficiency. Finally, Thrakener gave up. He beamed a message to the human ships orbiting his world. It was just 3 words. How do you know? A reply came back in minutes. It was just as short. We always know. After that, Thrakener quit trying. And so did every other Valexi commander who was secretly trying to rebuild their forces. The message was loud and clear. You couldn't hide from the humans. You couldn't outsmart them. All you could do was accept your new reality and live with it. The rest of the galaxy learned that lesson too. The species that had quietly backed the attack on Vaspera 7 started getting visits from human diplomats. The Moric Empire was near the top of that list. They had sold intelligence to the Valency, giving them details on human shipping lanes and colony defenses. Kithvari had used Moric data to pick the perfect time and place for his attack. The Moric Emperor was a creature made of living fire, ancient and incredibly proud. He'd been ruling his empire for 3,000 years and had seen countless species rise and fall. He had never once bowed to anyone. When the human diplomatic ship showed up, he flat out refused to see them. He just sent a message telling them to get out of his space, now. The humans didn't leave. They didn't even bother replying. They just stayed put, a single tiny ship hanging in orbit over the Moric homeworld. A week later, the Emperor sent a fleet to scare them off. 50 warships, the absolute pride of the Moric military, moved in on the little human vessel. By the time the fleet got there, the human ship was gone. The Emperor claimed victory and told his ships to come on home. They never made it. Every single ship in that fleet suffered a simultaneous engine failure. They were just drifting in space, dead in the water, unable to move or even call for help. Then, their life support systems started to fail, and none of the emergency overrides worked. 50 ships and 10,000 crew members, all completely helpless. And then, the human ship reappeared. It coasted slowly through the crippled Moric fleet. It didn't fire a weapon. It didn't taunt them. Just broadcast a message. Emperor Morax, you provided information that helped murder 847 children. We are here to discuss how you plan to make amends for this. If you refuse to meet with us again, your fleet will stay exactly where it is until their life support gives out. The choice is yours. The very next day, the Emperor met with the human diplomats. The humans weren't asking for much. They wanted a public apology admitting the Morax role in the Vaspera 7 attack. They wanted reparations sent to a fund for the victims' families, and they wanted a formal apology. The Emperor, who hadn't said sorry for anything in 3,000 years, apologized. Similar situations played out all over the galaxy. Every species that had helped with the attack got a visit. And every single one of them was given the same choice: own up to what you did or deal with the consequences. No one ever chose the consequences a second time. Meanwhile, Ambassador Kithvari was becoming a problem. Once the initial shock faded, the young politician tried to make a run for it. He booked a private ship to sneak out of Venaxi space. His grand plan was to get to neutral territory, find some allies, and start a resistance against the human occupation. He made it about 3 light years before his ship just stopped working. When Valency authorities finally reached the ship, Kithvari was still on it. He was physically fine, but something inside him had broken. The humans had left him in a small room with no controls, nothing to do, and no way to even tell how much time was passing. The only thing in this room was a screen playing an endless loop of pictures and words. It showed the faces of every single human killed on Vesper 7. Their names, how old they were, their life stories, what they dreamed of doing, who they loved, and who was missing them now. For 3 days, Kithvari was left alone with those faces, unable to sleep, unable to even look away. When the rescue crew finally opened the door, they found him huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, whispering their names. Emma, Marcus, Sarah, David, Michael, Jennifer, over and over, like some kind of twisted prayer. The doctor said he'd recover, that the damage was all in his head, not his body. With enough time and therapy, he'd be his old self again. The human representative who met with the Galaxy officials saw it differently. Ambassador Kithvari will spend 3,247 years in that room, she stated calmly. 1 year for every life he ordered destroyed. Our medical technology will keep him alive and perfectly healthy for the entire time. He will learn the name of every single person he murdered. He will learn what exactly he erased from the universe. The Valency officials were horrified. This is torture, they protested. It's cruel. It's inhumane. The human representative listened patiently before she replied. You are correct. It is cruel, but it is not torture. Torture is meaningless. It only exists to cause pain. This has a purpose. Kithvari ordered the deaths of 3,247 people because he decided their lives had no value. He will now spend 3,247 years learning that every single one of those lives mattered more than he could ever imagine. That is not torture. That is an education. She paused for a moment. You might also want to think of it as an act of mercy. We considered several other options. This was the kindest one we could all agree on. The Valency officials didn't dare ask what the other options were. Kithvari was moved to a human facility, somewhere in the deep darkness of space. His location was kept secret. His family was denied visitation. He would live for over 3 millennia, surrounded by the faces of people he never knew, learning their names, their stories, and their lost dreams. Some said the punishment was too harsh. Others argued it wasn't nearly harsh enough. The humans didn't ask for anyone's opinion. The old soldier of Varan watched it all happen with a very complicated mix of feelings. He knew this day would come. He'd tried to stop it, tried to warn his superiors that their arrogance would lead to ruin. But in the end, he was a soldier, and he had followed his orders. So when the human ship hailed him, he didn't run. The man who met him looked to be about his own age, maybe 60 years old, with eyes that had seen too much and regretted more than a little of it. "You tried to stop him," the human diplomat stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I tried to warn him," Varan corrected, his voice heavy. "That's not the same thing." "No," the man agreed softly. "It's not. But it's something." For hours they talked. The human didn't accuse, he asked. He asked about the attack, about the disgraced ambassador Kethvari, and about the culture that could have allowed such a thing to happen. Varan answered every question with brutal honesty, offering no excuses. When it was over, the human stood and held out his hand, a gesture Varan recognized as a sign of peace. "You won't be punished," the man said. "You followed orders, but you also pushed back. You documented your objections. You did everything you could." Varan hesitantly took the offered hand. "What happens to my people now?" "You rebuild," the human said. "You learn, and you become better." "We'll be watching," he continued, "but we won't interfere unless we have to. The Valency Dominion will survive. It'll just be different." "Different how?" The human offered a sad, weary smile. "You're going to learn to value life. All life, not just your own. Your children will grow up hearing the story of what happens when a people sees others as worthless. They won't make the same mistake their grandparents did." He let go of Varan's hand. "That's the real punishment, General. Not the sanctions or the fleet we'll leave in orbit. The real punishment is that for the next 100 generations, every single child will know what their ancestors did. They will carry that shame," the diplomat said. "It will become part of their story." Varan felt a chill run down his spine. In his culture, honor was everything. The stain of Vesper 7 would never wash out. "Is that fair?" he asked quietly. The human paused, giving the question real thought. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe it's not. Maybe punishing children for the sins of their ancestors is wrong. We've argued about it endlessly among ourselves." He gazed out the viewport at Varan's homeworld hanging in the blackness. "But I do know this. If we just smashed your fleets and left, you'd rebuild. In 100 years, maybe 200, you'd be right back where you were. Another power-hungry leader would rise, another atrocity would happen, and the cycle would just start all over again." He turned back to face Varan. "This way, the cycle breaks. Your children will grow up with this memory burned into their history. They'll teach their children not to hate us, but to understand what happens when you forget that other people matter." The human walked to the door. "We don't enjoy this, General, but we are doing what we believe is necessary to make sure another Vesper 7 never, ever happens again." And with that, he was gone. Varan was left alone, with nothing but the truth for company. Miles away, in the grand hall of the Galactic Concord, ancient beings gathered to witness history. "We have observed the human's response," the Lithori representative announced, its crystalline body shimmering. "We watched them defeat the mighty Valanaji without firing a single shot. We watched them deliver a punishment without taking a single life. We have seen them reshape the galaxy without conquering a single planet." The ancient being glowed brighter. "The younger races among you have often asked why we feared a species with such short lives and fragile bodies. Now you have your answer. We feared them because they are patient. We feared them because they are thorough. And we feared them because when they finally decide to act, they are unstoppable." The Lithori seemed to look at every representative at once. But there is something more, something the old warnings never mentioned. The humans are not just dangerous, they are merciful. They could have shattered your worlds, but they chose not to. They could have enacted vengeance, but they chose restraint. A hush fell over the hall. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing of all. A species that is only dangerous can be fought. A species that is both dangerous and merciful is impossible to predict. You never know if they will bring retribution or forgiveness. You can only pray you never force them to choose. The elders understood. The universe had fundamentally changed. And back in human space, the families of Vesper 7 grieved, they remembered, and they raised their children with the promise that their lost loved ones would never be forgotten. The dead could not be returned, but they would be honored, their names echoing through time as a warning, ensuring it would never happen again. This was the human way. Not destruction, but memory. Not revenge, but justice. And the galaxy was finally learning the difference. 100 years passed. A century is a blink of an eye to a lethargy, but for others, it's enough time for a new world to be born from the ashes of the old. The old galactic order, built on the simple rule of might makes right, was gone. The species with the biggest guns no longer made the rules. The Valency Dominion still existed, but it was a shadow of its former self. Human ships still hung in their skies, silent watchers, constant reminders. The old soldier, Varen, had passed away 30 years after the reckoning. In his last years, he traveled from world to world, speaking to the young. He never made excuses, he only explained. "We thought we were strong," he would say, his recorded voice echoing in classrooms. "We thought strength gave us the right to do anything we wanted. We were wrong. There is always someone stronger. There is always a price for cruelty. The humans taught us a lesson we should have learned on our own." Some of the older generations hated it. They called it humiliation. But the young didn't see it that way. They felt a sense of responsibility. A brilliant young diplomat named Kiral, born long after the attack, became the voice of this new generation. "My grandfather supported the attack," she said in an interview broadcast across the galaxy. "He cheered when he heard the news. He thought the humans had finally been put in their place." She took a breath. "When I was a little girl, I asked him why. How could he support something so horrible? He told me the humans, they weren't real to him. They were just a problem that needed solving." Kiral looked straight into the camera. "That is the lesson my grandfather's shame taught me. Other beings are real. Their lives matter. When we forget that, we become the monsters." My grandfather wasn't a monster. He was just an ordinary man who forgot that one simple truth: I will not make his mistake. Her words sparked a galactic conversation. And all the while, Ambassador Kethvari, the architect of the massacre, continued his sentence. 100 years had passed, but human medicine kept him from aging. His punishment was to learn. He had memorized thousands of names, the faces of every child who died on Vesper 7, their favorite toys, their secret hopes, the last words they ever spoke. He would not be released for 3,000 years. He was already a different being. In a rare interview, 70 years into his sentence, a reporter asked if he regretted what he did. "Regret isn't a strong enough word," Kethvari whispered, his voice raspy. "I destroyed 3,247 universes, because that's what every person is, isn't it? An entire universe of memories, hopes, and dreams, and I extinguished them all. Killing someone isn't just about ending a life. It's about extinguishing an entire universe." His eyes looked past the camera into a void only he could see. "I destroyed 847 of those universes before they ever got the chance to begin. Children. They could have been scientists, artists, teachers, parents. They would have known love and given it in return. They would have reshaped the galaxy in ways I can't even fathom, and I erased them all for political gain. Tears streamed down his weathered face. If I could turn back time, I'd stop that arrogant young fool I once was. I'd grab him by the collar and shake him until he understood the horror of his ambition. But I can't go back. I can only move forward, learning every name, memorizing every face, carrying their stories with me until the end of my days. And that's where the interview cut off. For some watching, it stirred a flicker of pity for the broken man, HFY. For others, he was getting exactly what he deserved. The humans, however, offered no opinion at all. They just quietly continued his punishment as they had promised. In the wake of the incident, the entire galactic political scene had been turned on its head. The old power structures, built on military dominance, simply fell apart. After all, what's the point of a massive star fleet if humans can shut it down with a flip of a switch? What good are planet-killer weapons if they can be turned into harmless toys overnight? New kinds of power began to rise. Economic alliances, scientific partnerships, and cultural exchange. These were things you couldn't just turn off, a kind of strength that didn't come from the barrel of a gun. The galactic conquered had to adapt. Treaties were torn up and rewritten from scratch. Trade deals were completely renegotiated. Species that had been on the brink of war were now suddenly allies, sharing resources and knowledge. It wasn't a perfect utopia. There were still arguments, disagreements, and moments of high tension. But the very nature of those arguments had changed. No one wanted to become the next Valony. Nobody wanted to get on the humans' bad side. The humans had changed too. In the century that passed since the Vesperus 7 incident, they had stepped more into the galactic spotlight. They weren't controlling things, but they were present. You'd find human diplomats on major councils and human scientists in labs across the galaxy. Human cargo ships zipped between star systems, moving goods everywhere. But there was a different vibe about them now, something every other species could feel. Before Vesperus 7, humans were seen as the soft ones, peaceful to a fault. They were always smiling, making friends easily, and seemed to just want everyone to get along. Now, everyone understood that their friendliness was a choice. Humans were friendly because they chose to be, not because they had to be. Beneath those easy smiles was a deep, watchful patience, the kind that would never forget and never forgive an unprovoked attack. A human philosopher, Marcus Webb, summed it up perfectly in a book that became a bestseller galaxy-wide. We are not by nature a species that seeks war. He wrote, "We will always prefer peace, cooperation, and friendship. But make no mistake, we are capable of war. We are capable of a level of destruction that would leave most other species breathless with horror. We choose not to unleash this power, not because we lack it, but because we know there are smarter ways to solve our problems." He went on, "The lesson from Vesperus 7 isn't that humans are dangerous. Any species can be dangerous when pushed. The real lesson is that we've learned to control our own dangerous impulses. We've learned to channel that power into a response, not an act of aggression. We didn't crush the Valony out of anger or revenge. We responded to a terrible injustice with a measured, fitting consequence. That," he concluded, "is maturity. That is civilization. That is the definition of true strength." His book was assigned in schools everywhere. Young people from every species read it, debated it, and argued about its meaning. Some called Webb arrogant, others hailed him as a visionary. But everyone was thinking about what he said. Then, on the anniversary of Vesperus 7, something happened that nobody saw coming. The humans announced they were building a memorial where the colony had been destroyed. That wasn't the surprise. The surprise was the guest list. They invited every single species in the galaxy to send a representative to the dedication ceremony. Even the Valani. The Valani government went back and forth for weeks trying to decide. Was it a trap? A test of some kind? A few dared to hope it was a genuine gesture. A young diplomat named Kiral argued passionately that they had to go. If we refuse, it proves we've learned nothing, she pleaded. But if we go, we show the galaxy we are ready to face what our ancestors did. This is an opportunity, not a threat. Her words won them over. A delegation was chosen, with Kiral as its leader. The memorial itself was breathtaking in its simplicity. Where the colony once stood, a garden now bloomed, filled with trees from a dozen different worlds. Their clashing colors and shapes blended together to create something beautiful and new, something that could only exist because different people had come together. In the heart of the garden stood a single, polished wall. Etched into its surface were 3,247 names, every single person who had died, every universe that had been lost. Representatives from all corners of the galaxy gathered before it. Humans stood next to Kretak. Morik stood beside Lithori, and right at the front stood the Valani delegation, forced to look upon the names of those their people had murdered. A human woman stepped up to speak. She was old, her hair as white as snow, and her face a map of her years, but her eyes were clear, and her voice rang with strength. My name is Maya Chun. 100 years ago, my mother, Sarah Chun, stood before the galactic Concord and spoke about what happened on this ground. She asked for justice, and justice was served. She passed away 20 years ago, so I am here to speak for her. She scanned the crowd, her gaze lingering on the diverse faces. My grandmother died on this moon. She was 53 years old. She was a teacher. She taught children how to read, how to think, and how to dream. They found her in the rubble of the schoolhouse she loved so much. Maya's voice was steady, without a hint of wavering. For a very long time, I hated the Valani. That hatred was a fire that kept me warm. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning. But as I got older, she continued, I realized that hating you wasn't honoring my grandmother. She was a teacher. She believed in growth, in learning, in becoming better. If she were here, she wouldn't want me to hold on to hate. Maya turned and looked directly at the Valani delegation. You came here today. You crossed the entire galaxy to stand before this wall and own what was done. That took courage. It took humility. And it's exactly what my grandmother would have wanted. Then, Maya Chun started walking toward them. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a path. She stopped right in front of Kiral. You weren't even born when this happened. You didn't choose this. But you are here now, facing it. And that matters. She reached out and took the young diplomat's hand. We can't change the past. We can't bring back the dead. But the future, that's a story we're still writing. And if you're willing, we can write it together. Not as enemies, not as victor and vanquished, but as people who have learned from a great tragedy and chosen a better path. Kiral felt hot tears running down her cheeks and didn't bother to wipe them away. We are willing, she choked out. We are so sorry. We will do better. The two women stood there together, holding hands before the wall of names, as the representatives of 100 different worlds watched in stunned silence. In that moment, something shifted. Something began to heal. Later, one by one, each representative placed a small stone at the foot of the memorial wall. It was an old human custom, a quiet way of saying, I was here. I remember. By nightfall, a mountain of thousands of stones surrounded the wall. The Lithori representative, an ancient being who had seen more history than anyone else alive, was the last to place its stone. It had watched empires rise and crumble. had seen countless civilizations burn themselves out with arrogance and power. It had always believed that this was simply the way of things. But seeing this ceremony, watching sworn enemies stand together in shared sorrow and hope, the Lithori felt something it hadn't felt in thousands of years. It was a choice that sealed the fate of a galaxy, and it started with a lie. Ambassador Keith Vary, brimming with arrogance, declared the human colony on Vesper 7 a military threat. It wasn't. It was a town filled with families, schools, and playgrounds. But nobody stopped him, nobody questioned him. And in one horrific day, the colony was wiped from existence. The galaxy watched, expecting the humans, a quiet, unassuming species, to crumble. They thought humanity was weak. They were wrong. And if you want to know how one of the biggest bullies in the universe got what was coming to him, you'll want to hear what happened next. The humans didn't scream for revenge. They didn't launch a blind, furious attack. The galaxy held its breath, confused, as humanity simply went silent. Then, the surprises began. One by one, the financial networks supporting Ambassador Vary's political party mysteriously failed. Key military leaders who supported the attack found their careers ruined by sudden, perfectly timed scandals. It was precise, it was quiet, and it was utterly terrifying. Humanity wasn't waging a war. They were performing surgery, cutting out a cancer without harming the patient. The biggest surprise was Ambassador Vary himself. He was captured not in a fiery battle, but when his own guards, disgusted by his actions and paid off with untraceable human credits, simply stepped aside and let a small team of operatives walk into his palace. Everyone expected a public execution. Instead, the humans revealed their true, chilling plan. They didn't want his death, they wanted his life, all of it. The sentence was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Keith Vary was sentenced to 3,000 years in a memory prison. He would be kept alive, forced to experience the life of every single person he had ordered killed on Vesper 7. He would feel their hopes, their dreams, their love for their families, and then their final moments of terror. And to ensure no one ever forgot, a list of the victims' names was permanently linked to his mind, a constant, scrolling memorial inside his own head. This wasn't just punishment. It was a lesson. The galaxy was transformed. Suddenly, every ambitious general, every ruthless politician thought twice before targeting civilians. They had seen the price of cruelty, and it was a price no one wanted to pay. But the final surprise, the one that truly changed everything, came after the sentence. Humanity reached out to the ambassador's people, the very people who had destroyed their colony, and offered to help them rebuild their now shattered government. On the scarred ground of Vesper 7, they didn't build a fortress. They planted a garden. Trees from 100 worlds grew there, a living monument to the lives that were lost. It became a place of pilgrimage, where beings of all species could come and read the names on the memorial wall. And on quiet nights, visitors swore they could hear the faint, happy echoes of children's laughter, not ghosts, but a symbol of all the children across the galaxy who would now grow up in peace. 100 years later, a young girl from the ambassador's own species looked up at the human ship still patrolling her ski. "Grandma, why are they still here?" she asked. Her grandmother smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "They're not here to watch over us anymore, little one. They're here to remind us that strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about having the wisdom to offer a hand instead." That was the real lesson of Vesper 7. The powerful old races had always warned each other, never provoke the humans. They were right, but they only knew half the story. Humans could be terrifying in their anger, yes, but they could also be incredible in their compassion. They had proven that the deepest wounds can heal, and that the only way forward is together. They weren't just a dangerous species, they were the galaxy's greatest teachers, and the galaxy was finally, gratefully, ready to learn.